December 11th, 1990, 6:51 in the evening, 247 Mulberry Street, Little Italy, Manhattan. A black Mercedes pulls up to a bricked-over storefront with no sign, no windows, and no indication from the outside that anything is happening inside. A man in an expensive overcoat steps out. He is 50 years old. He moves with the ease of someone who has never, not once in his adult life, been afraid to walk through a door. His name is John Gotti, and he is about to walk into the room that will end his life. Not literally, not tonight. But the FBI Supervisory Special Agent Bruce Mouw, watching from binoculars in an apartment across the street, speaks quietly into a walkie-talkie the moment Gotti disappears inside. He says 4 words. Number 1 is in. An arrest team moves toward the front door. Inside, Gotti settles into the back room of the Ravenite Social Club, where his underboss, Sammy Gravano, and consigliere Frank Locascio are already waiting. There are portraits on the back wall. One of Gotti himself, one of his mentor, the late Dellacroce, who ran this same club for decades before his death, and whose shadow still fills the room. An espresso machine hisses. The door blows open. George Gabriel, the lead FBI agent, comes in first. Gotti, by every account, does not panic. He does not run. He looks up from his espresso and tells the agents calmly that he is not going anywhere until he finishes his coffee. That was the last night John Gotti walked free, and the room that destroyed him had been destroying men for 66 years before he ever sat down in it. This is the story of the Ravenite Social Club, not just the FBI bugs and the takedown of John Gotti. The full story, from the night it opened in 1926, through every boss who used it, abused it, and was ultimately consumed by it. This is the story of why every man who ran organized crime in New York for 6 decades felt compelled to show his face at 247 Mulberry Street. And why that compulsion, that need to be seen in the right room, was the thing that brought all of them down. But here is what makes this story genuinely strange. The Ravenite was not built to be powerful. It was not designed as a criminal headquarters. It started as a social club for Italian immigrants who needed somewhere to drink coffee and play cards. The power came later. It was acquired, inherited, concentrated over decades by the specific men who controlled it. And the reason every boss had to show his face there was not because of anything the building offered. It was because of what the building had become. Not a room, a symbol. And in organized crime, symbols have a power that no law can quantify and no wire can record. 1926, Mulberry Street, Little Italy. The neighborhood is still one of the most densely populated immigrant communities in America. The streets smell of garlic and fish and bread baking in ovens that never cool. The tenement buildings press together above storefronts that cycle through grocers, tailors, and small restaurants every few years. In the middle of this world, at 247 Mulberry Street, a social club opens under the name the Alto Knights Social Club, named after an old street gang from the Prohibition era, which took its own name from the Order of St. James of Alto Passio. It is a small space, 2 rooms in railroad style, a front room with tables and a coffee machine, a back room for private business. Nothing impressive from the outside. Nothing impressive from the inside either. But the men drinking coffee there include Lucky Luciano, Albert Anastasia, and the nucleus of what will become the most powerful crime organization in American history. And in organized crime, the value of a room is determined entirely by the men inside it, not by the furniture. By the 1940s, the club's most dangerous regular is Aniello Dellacroce, born March 15, 1914, in Little Italy itself, the son of Italian immigrants from Veneto. He grew up in a tenement directly across the street from the spot where the club now stands. As a teenager, he worked as a butcher's apprentice. By his early 20s, he had joined the Mangano crime family, the predecessor of the Gambino family, and attached himself to the most feared man in American organized crime. His name was Albert Anastasia. Dellacroce, who stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, broad-shouldered, with what NYPD Detective Ralph Salerno described as the most frightening eyes he had ever seen in a living person, became Anastasia's personal instrument of violence. Federal testimony at the 1963 Senate hearings on organized crime described him plainly. 10 arrests, 5 convictions, gambling, loan sharking, extortion, strong-arm work, and murders. A federal agent who tracked Dellacroce for years told investigators that he appeared to take pleasure in killing, that he would peer into a victim's face like some kind of dark angel at the moment of death. His name meant Little Lamb of the Cross in Italian. There was nothing lamb-like about him. He had a nickname that tells you everything: Father O'Neill. Dellacroce would carry out Murder Incorporated assignments dressed in the traditional garb of a Roman Catholic priest, tab collar, clerical shirt, the full costume. He used it to move through neighborhoods without drawing attention. He used it because nobody looks twice at a priest, and then he would do what he had been sent to do. He bought the Ravenite Social Club and made it his permanent headquarters. He lived in the tenement across the street. For Dellacroce, the Ravenite was not a criminal asset. It was home. In 1957, everything changed. On October 25th of that year, Albert Anastasia was murdered in the barber shop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan, shot to death by masked gunmen while receiving a shave. The hit was arranged by Carlo Gambino and Vito Genovese. Anastasia was gone. Gambino was the new boss of what would be renamed the Gambino crime family, and he needed Dellacroce. This is the moment that made the Ravenite what it became. Gambino purchased 247 Mulberry Street. He renamed the club. He chose the name Ravenite, reportedly after his favorite poem by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. And he installed Dellacroce as his underboss. With the Ravenite as Dellacroce's permanent operational base, the relationship Gambino constructed was precise and deliberate. Gambino provided the intelligence, the political connections, the strategic mind. Dellacroce provided the violence, the loyalty, the soldiers. Between them, they built the largest crime family in American history. By the time of Gambino's death in 1976, the family had 500 made members and thousands of associates. And through all of it, 247 Mulberry Street was the place where the business of that empire was conducted, confirmed, and enforced. Every major figure who passed through the Gambino family during its golden era came through the Ravenite. You did not need to be summoned. You needed to appear. Because appearing was how you demonstrated that you were part of the structure, that you recognized its authority, that you knew who was in the room and understood what that meant. This is the first thing that nobody tells you about the Ravenite, and why every boss had to show his face there. It was not about what was said in the room. It was about the act of being present. In organized crime, physical presence in the right location at the right time is a form of communication. When you show up at the social club, you are saying, without words, that you acknowledge the hierarchy, that you are inside the family, that you are not a threat. When you stop showing up, you are saying the opposite. Paul Castellano, Gambino's successor as boss beginning in 1976, began shifting operations away from the Ravenite and toward his mansion in Staten Island, which the men called the White House. The message was not lost on anyone. He was signaling distance from the street, from Dellacroce's world, from the traditional criminal culture the Ravenite represented. The rift that would eventually kill him was already visible in that choice. Dellacroce absorbed the insult the way he absorbed everything, quietly. He pledged loyalty to Castellano because that was what tradition required. He kept running the Ravenite. He kept managing the violent, criminal side of the family's operations in Manhattan, the robbery, the hijacking, the extortion, while Castellano presided over the construction and trucking rackets from his mansion in the suburbs. But the city and the street and the small bricked-in storefront on Mulberry Street Those belonged to Dellacroce, always. In 1965, that same year, a young man from Queens named John Gotti began running errands for the family. He was assigned to a crew under Capo Carmine Fatico, operating out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park. And through Fatico, he was introduced to Dellacroce. What followed was one of the defining mentorships in mob history. Gotti idolized Dellacroce. He said it plainly and repeatedly. The old man represented everything Gotti wanted to be, not just the authority, the bearing. The way Dellacroce walked into a room and required nothing because everything was already understood. And the room Dellacroce walked into, the room where that bearing was formed and maintained and expressed, was always the Ravenite. By 1980, law enforcement had already planted a bug inside the Ravenite. The results were frustrating. The espresso machine hissed constantly. The soda machine rattled. Multiple conversations overlapped. The acoustics were terrible. FBI teams went in multiple times, repositioned the device, used special audio filters. Still nothing usable. The physical structure of the club, its small size and constant ambient noise, functioned as accidental counter-surveillance. The mob had not engineered this. It was pure luck, but it held for years. Aniello Dellacroce was arrested at the Ravenite by IRS agents in 1984 on charges of tax evasion. He faced federal racketeering charges the following year as part of the Mafia commission trial, in which the entire leadership of the 5 New York families was indicted simultaneously. He was dying of lung cancer. He knew the diagnosis. He knew the commission trial could produce sentences of 100 years. He kept coming to the Ravenite anyway, because the Ravenite was his. December 2nd, 1985. Aniello Dellacroce, 71 years old, died of lung cancer at Mary Immaculate Hospital in Queens. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens. Paul Castellano, his boss, did not visit him while he was dying, did not attend his wake, did not come to the funeral. In a world built entirely on the performance of loyalty and respect, this was not simply a slight, it was a statement, and John Gotti received it as one. 14 days later, on December 16th, 1985, Castellano and his new underboss, Thomas Bellotti, were shot to death outside Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street in Manhattan. Gotti watched the hit from a car parked across the intersection, alongside Gravano. When it was done, Gotti drove slowly past the front of the restaurant. He looked at Bellotti's body on the sidewalk. Gravano, according to his own account, said, "He's gone." And Gotti drove away. The next day, senior members of the Gambino family began arriving at the Ravenite Social Club to congratulate the new boss, one by one, the capos, the soldiers, the respected figures of the family. Each of them coming to 247 Mulberry Street, each of them standing in front of Gotti, each of them performing the act of acknowledgement that the Ravenite had witnessed for 60 years. The room absorbed it all, as it always had. But Gotti was a different kind of boss. He understood the symbolic power of the Ravenite immediately. What he did not understand, what he could not accept because his ego would not allow it, was that the symbol worked in both directions. The Ravenite made the boss visible, and visible meant watched. Beginning in January 1988, Gotti ordered every capo in the Gambino family to appear at the Ravenite once a week, not when convenient, every week, Wednesday. This was not an operational requirement. It was a vanity requirement. Gotti wanted to be seen receiving deference. He wanted the ritual of the line of men coming to kiss his ring, metaphorically and sometimes literally, in the room that had belonged to Dellacroce and, through Dellacroce, to the entire legacy of the Gambino family. He wanted to be confirmed as boss in the most historically significant room the family possessed. Sammy Gravano told him it was a mistake, not once, multiple times. I told him. Gravano later recounted, "John, why are we meeting in the club? They're all outside. Cops, state guys, federal guys. What are we doing here?" Gotti's response has been quoted in every book and documentary ever produced about this period. He said, "I know what I'm doing. Forget the government. They're nothing. Don't worry about it." FBI Gambino squad leader Bruce Mouw called the weekly mandatory appearances antithetical to the concept of a secret society. He was correct. Within months, the FBI had photographed and identified virtually every significant figure in the Gambino family hierarchy simply by documenting who walked through the front door of the Ravenite on Wednesday evenings. The weekly ritual gave the Bureau a complete organizational chart of the most powerful crime family in America. Federal prosecutors later credited Gotti himself with assisting them in imprisoning all 23 family capos, because the mandatory Wednesday appearances handed investigators a gift that no informant, no wiretap, no covert operation could have provided so cleanly. And it was not enough. Gotti held sensitive conversations in the hallway of the building's ground floor, not in the club itself. He held meetings in the upstairs apartment of Nettie Sorelli, the elderly widow of a Gambino soldier, on the third floor above the club. He believed these locations were clean. He believed the walls of the building that had sheltered organized crime for 6 decades would shelter him, too. In the Thanksgiving weekend of 1989, with Sorelli in Florida, FBI agents obtained a court-authorized warrant and installed concealed microphones in the apartment above the Ravenite. They also bugged the ground floor hallway. Between November 30th, 1989, and January 24th, 1990, Gotti held 5 meetings in that apartment and spoke with the freedom of a man who believed he was completely secure. He discussed murders he had ordered. He discussed murders he intended to order. He identified Louis de Bono, a Gambino soldier who had ignored a summons, as someone who needed to be killed. He confirmed his role in the assassinations of Robert DiBernardo and Liborio Melito. He did all of this in a room he believed was private, directly above the club his mentor had spent a lifetime building. The FBI recorded approximately 600 hours of audio from that apartment across the surveillance period. On the night of December 11th, 1990, Bruce Mouw watched through binoculars from across the street as Gravano, Gotti, and Locascio arrived at the Ravenite. He gave the signal. The arrest team went in. Gotti sat with his espresso and waited. He was charged with 5 murders, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, illegal gambling, loan sharking, bribery, obstruction of justice, and tax evasion. Gravano, Gotti, and Locascio were all denied bail after tapes from the Sorelli apartment were played at a pretrial hearing. The recordings were so comprehensive and so damning that the court found them sufficient grounds not to release the accused. Sammy Gravano eventually agreed to testify against Gotti. His cooperation was the final piece. He admitted responsibility for 19 murders as part of his plea agreement. In April 1992, after a trial in the Eastern District of New York before Judge Juan Leo Glasser, John Gotti was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, on June 10, 2002, of throat cancer. He was 61 years old. The building at 247 Mulberry Street was seized by federal marshals. When officials informed the remaining club members that they were losing the Ravenite, one of them slammed a door in a reporter's face with a final statement. "Listen, fella," he said, "we've been here 90 years. We're losing the place. We have no plans." 90 years. Think about that. From the Alto Knights Social Club in 1926 to the federal seizure in the 1990s,